now we're here. We'll start. Stuart apparently is on his way, intended to join us, but we do have a quorum, so I will convene the Independent Taxpayers Oversight Committee. And welcome to everybody this morning. First order of business is the approval of the minutes. I have a motion to approve without a reading of such.
I did read them, and I move approval.
I'll second.
Second. Any discussion? All in favor?
You got it?
I'm sorry?
You got my second?
I got your second. All in favor of such, raise their hands. All right, minutes are approved. Next, we have public comment. I have not received any notice of any desired public comment. There is none. Received no such. Okay,
Can I just add something real quickly?
Pardon me?
I'm not the public, but can I mention something real quickly?
Well, I don't know. If you're not the public.
Yeah, we'll have more to report, but actually today, I think we brought to you earlier that we are doing a refinancing of the State Route 125 loans. And then we will be repaying Transnet around 64 million and stuff, but actually the pricing is occurring today. And we'll know the actual dollar amounts later and stuff, but we actually are getting quite interest in the sales. We have about $204 million for full revenue bonds for sale, and so far have about more than $3 billion in orders. So hopefully that'll result in really good prices.
Can you use the phrase, we will be repaying Transnet?
So
the we, that's not, it's not Transnet. But
the Sandag in late 2011 acquired the 125 toll road out of bankruptcy. To finance that purchase, we assumed the TIFIA loan. And
but the we in that case
we Sandag.
Sandag.
We Sandag, but also to help finance, there was also a $64 million loan that the commission, the Transnet dollars, made to acquire this.
It's just a rebalancing.
Yes, it's a
It's all
rebalancing. So
Transnet.
yes, the Transnet will get repaid that, and then we'll be refunded.
It's
But
all
the
under
TIFIA
Sandag.
The TIFIA will be refinanced. We'll be taking out those loans, which are high interest loans that are anywhere from 7 to 13, 14%. And so right now, I think we're hoping that the bonding will actually get us close to about 4% in the year 2020.
Okay. Anything else?
No.
Okay. We will move to the consent calendar. We just got started. We knew you were stuck in traffic. Or you hit a pothole on the way over. I would like to discuss, there's two items in the consent agenda that one requires approval and the other requires a recommendation. So we can take those in turn and then we can approve everything else by consent. But the committee schedules, does anybody have any concern with the committee schedule that's proposed for? It shows all 12 meetings, whereas in the past we have typically presumed we would be dark in one meeting. I don't know whether there's any desire to.
It kind of mentions that at the bottom.
It does refer to it. It says we may be dark if there are reasons to be dark.
But we'll take action to be dark. At this point in time, we're approving the assumption we'll be having all meetings. Is that
It pretty much covers both. So if you decide to have, and we think that it's necessary to have a meeting in August.
This would be approving all 12, but giving us the ability to go dark. Everybody, no one has any problem with that? They will cover it by consent. And the second item, which is in agenda item number 4, which is the senior mini grant proposal, another schedule extension request here. And I just had, reading the document here, I understand the dilemma that the folks are in, couldn't get riders. What also struck me is they couldn't get customers. And I'm wondering if this is a program in search of a need. And if it's nothing more than a program in search of a need, whether there's any reason to continue it, whether it would be more advantageous to redeploy funds to some other program. So I think we have someone to speak.
Yeah, so my name is Jack Christensen. I'm the grants administrator for the Specialized Transportation Program. And then this is my colleague, Somray Prashar. She's from Mountain Health and Community Services. And that's a great question. So the reason why we're asking for an extension, or the ITOC to recommend an extension for the TC to approve, is because over the last few call for projects, competitive cycles that we've had, we've noticed that our grantees have submitted very competitive applications. So what we're seeing is that they're trying to stretch a transnet dollar. They're trying to really provide a program that's very cost efficient. So if you remember from the last quarterly status update that I gave, there were 6 other grantees who were on the schedule watch list. So what we're asking today is for, we would like the program to run an additional 7 months so that they can meet their performance indicators, their objectives, by providing all the trips that they propose that they would, and then draw down their grant fund in its entirety.
I understand the objectives. I guess my concern is that maybe we could hear the lack of customers. I can certainly understand the difficulty you have in getting volunteer drivers. That will come and go, but it strikes me from the write-up you were also struggling getting customers. And if there are no customers, we don't need drivers, we don't need a program. And I'm just curious of what is going to change in the future that you'll feel that there'll be a demand for the services you're offering, whereas now there doesn't appear to be any demand.
So this program is actually based out of Campo. It's a rural community. So there is a lack of transportation in that area, which is why this program is needed for our senior population. The lack of getting more seniors into the program, we plan on doing more marketing and more, since it's a close-knit community, it's a lot of word of mouth as well. But this is a big need in the community because there is a lot of lack of transportation to and from doctor's offices, to and from pharmacies. There's no pharmacy right now in Campo. So it is definitely a need, but because there's a lack of volunteer drivers as well, there's times where we aren't able to take the seniors when they need to go because there's nobody to take them. So that's why the numbers aren't where they need to be, is because sometimes we have to cancel the trip due to the not having enough drivers. So the seniors need the program, but we're struggling getting drivers because it's in the communities in Campo, and it's just a small community.
Have you ever advertised in the doctor's offices, or are you not allowed to? I didn't see that on your plan.
We do. We have advertised because we have our own clinic in Campo as well. So we have advertised in our Campo clinic as well. But again, it's just the lack of volunteers. The other thing that's causing us to not have enough volunteers is that their insurance, or our volunteers claim that their insurance gets higher because of the number of mileage that they're putting in their cars. So because of that, then they keep dropping out of the program as volunteers because they don't want their insurance to go up.
I'm just trying to kind of square the situation to the introductory comments you made. In your reference to the competitiveness of the bidding process, are you in effect saying that if they would have bid based on the numbers that they're actually producing, then they would not have been successful in getting a grant? Is that what you meant by the competitiveness?
No, all of these applications were put together using data that each grantee foresaw that they could meet. They thought they could meet these numbers, but they just didn't foresee the challenges in retaining volunteers or identifying additional clients. So this is kind of just I think a unique challenge to this grantee. Other grantees were seeing that they're making progress on their schedules, but the competitive process scored the application appropriately. They would have won. They would have won because their project was meeting a high need that's identified in our coordinated plan, which really is what drives our competitive process.
So, if I could follow on. So, within the challenges that you're describing in this current grant, when this grant runs out and you're doing another bidding process for the sort of the next round, will the reality of these challenges be factored into the bidding process for next time?
Yeah, and we have, we're continually in the program here providing technical assistance to other grantees. We're gonna be looking at our evaluation criteria and our scoring to make sure that applications are scored taking into account the kind of reality of what they're proposing. So we are going to take a look at evaluation to make sure that projects are going to be able to reach their proposed goals.
I do believe, and we can double check on the actual criteria, but these programs and the tax programs have had at least some criteria that looks at past performance and judging the newer ones. I don't know
Yeah, I
how.
vaguely
how much
recall
it's-
that.
Yeah, but we can definitely look at that, but I'm pretty sure they have one with regard to
Yeah,
that.
that is a factor.
Is there any magic to the 7-month extension versus the 3-month extension, 6-month extension?
Yeah, so Summer and I have been working together based on the number of clients that they project to work with and the amount of time that we have in the remaining funds. We think that the 7-month is going to be the perfect amount of time that they'll need to complete their scope and their schedule.
And if I could also ask, in your judgment, do you think that there's a little bit of like a chicken and egg kind of problem, that the limited time horizon of the grant itself gets in the way of getting both the drivers and the residents involved in the program, because there's always a certain sort of startup period, and could you speak to that question about sort of that chicken and egg?
I think it depends, and that's a good question. I think it depends on the amount of time a program has actually been in operation. We have so many grantees who are, they've been around for 40 years here in the region, and they really know how to run a program like this. There are other programs who are kind of have more unique challenges, like being in a rural community, and I can let Summer talk to that a little bit, but it's going to vary. It just varies so much depending on the agency that's running the program. Do you have any other comments?
So for this program, I apologize, but I was given this project when I started back last year in September, but I believe this was our first program like this.
Well, that's what I was alluding to. If it's a little bit of the nature of the difficulties is connected to this being, I don't know if you would characterize it as a startup, but this is not one of the programs, correct me if I'm wrong, that has been running in this location for the past 10 years, right?
Correct.
I just need further discussion here. Everybody comfortable with granting the extension, which will be part of when we approve the consent agenda? All right, moving on to the next item on there is the item number 5. Extension of time on the residual waste finding project. Does anybody have any comments to question why we should not be recommending that? If not, we'll move to number 6, which is Stark Road. We have a watching list schedule here, a status report. There's nothing on the watching list. Does anybody have any questions on the watching list? If not, we'll go to the last item on the consent agenda, which is the bikeway program measure corridor. Same thing. It seems like there's no issues. We discussed it all on that. Unless anybody has any questions. All right, then I would ask for a motion to approve the entire package as presented.
So moved.
Motion second. Second. Any further discussion? All in favor, raise your operative arm. And passage of the consent agenda. Take us to agenda item number 8, which is Ariana giving us an update on what else you've been doing for the last month.
Yes. So since your October 11th meeting, the RTIP amendment number 8, which you saw at your last meeting, was adopted by the Transportation Committee. And then, as we mentioned at your last meeting, the Board of Directors had directed staff to provide additional information on future revenues as part of the proposed 2016-17 Transnet Plan of Finance, Major Corridor Plan of Finance update. And staff did provide that at the October 27th board meeting, and the board unanimously approved that Plan of Finance update. In terms of the board's review of the independent examination and status of the recruitment of the new executive director, the board approved incorporating recommendations from that examination into broader agency improvement initiatives. And the board's recruitment subcommittee is anticipated to make a recommendation on the selection of an executive search firm at its board meeting later this month. And then in addition, the board received an update on the 7-point data accuracy and modeling work plan, which was presented to the ITOC earlier this year. And then AB 805 was approved by the governor since your last meeting, and the board is already taking steps to implement provisions of that legislation.
Is there anything that you could share with us to elaborate on the 7-point plan update?
Yeah, so the board had pretty beefy meeting last Friday. They got an update on the executive director recruitment, just the subcommittee's meeting to interview the top 2 recruitment firms, I think on the 17th, so they're probably going to bring a recommendation to the board in early December. With regard to the 7-point plan, Ray did a presentation on kind of the status and all those items. Really, the first two items are done. The first one was identifying the error and whether it had any impact on sort of variables they used in our planning process. What it found was that the major things we use to do are, long-range planning. The variables for population, jobs, and housing, really there's no impact. It was really isolated more in terms of things having to do with income. So whether we use household income variables, which I would say personal income, which goes into the taxable retail sales projections. So definitely, I would say that we would have impacts there. So we identified that. The second step of the 7-point plan, or second point, really was, okay, given these things that we know we've isolated, these are the variables that were incorrect because of that cut and paste error. Where did that propagate into where? So staff did a fairly extensive interviewing of all the customers within Sandag, as well as all the products that we produce, whether it's the regional transportation plans or other planning documents. We know it was used in the sales tax forecast, so actually that's when we've already sort of addressed that, where we're not using those numbers at all. The board has adopted a new sales tax revenue forecast based upon those 3 outside or independent agency forecasts. So that's isolated and taken care of. In terms of the other documents, income is used to feed into our transportation model, but the error, well, it wasn't recognizing the error at the time. Adjustments were made to those incomes before they were sort of put into the transportation models. So the analysis that we've shown in terms of the travel demand, there was no effect. The major change we saw was about a 2% difference out in the year 2050, where it could have happened. So that's well into the range of errors. So we feel fairly confident that of the items we know that it hasn't had any propagating impact on other things we've done. We did have those household income numbers up on one of our websites where we just post information in terms of our estimates. We have taken those numbers down, and since we know that they were incorrect or not in error. So we feel we've sort of identified the problem, identified whether it had any impacts, which we feel that that either been adjusted or there are none. And then the remaining parts of the 7-point plan in terms of the data quality control, mapping out our process, providing kind of key staff, doing peer reviews and expert panel reviews, which are sort of our process improvements going forward. The board has elected to wrap that into what they've called the plan of excellence that will accomplish a number of things for the Sandag operation. So they're rolling the remaining items into broader Sandag reform efforts moving forward.
Does that have any implication for timing of findings, either staff or in some cases outside people to be participating in those quality control processes?
So outside, in terms of staff, some of the items that we've identified through this process are what we call processes, right? Quality assurance, quality control, QAQC. So we have identified we need to, there's some key positions that we do need to bring on and with regard to that. So that process is already occurring here within the technical services department.
So you posted for
we've
people to apply?
Done some internal recruitments and then are supplementing that by hiring some additional external staff to come forward. So that's ongoing. In terms of external, the things that are going to require external review are as we develop our new sort of forecasting model. We've shut down DEFN. So DEFN, which had the error, is no longer being used in sort of long-term forecasting. A new model has been developed, much simpler. It's been peer reviewed once. In other words, we've brought experts both from public sector, private sector, economists, demographers to provide comment on that. The general gist of those comments are it's we're sort of on the right track. We really felt that it was a good model for looking at demographic changes over the long term. The demographic drivers, birth, death rates, migration, are really drivers of long-term growth. But what the expert panel had asked that we do is that in the first 5 years, we need to build in an economic component. That economic efforts are, in the short term, more of a driver for growth in the short-term horizon. So that work will take some time to do. And so we will bring, as we develop that, we will be bringing, expert panel back to kind of evaluate the work as we build that new model.
And is there any kind of approval or transparency to the board as to the constitution of the expert panels?
Yeah, so that we actually reported to them who it was and what they included. I mean, Ray's presentation included the list and where they came from.
Can my understanding correctly that while all this work is ongoing, the board in the meantime is using some amalgamation of some 3 other sources for the forecast that they're relying on?
Right. So that's for the sort of sales tax revenue forecast. And in terms of our demographic forecast, population, jobs, and housing, we will be bringing that to. I have Taylor here too as well from technical services, but we will be bringing that to the board and have talked to them about, while we're developing a new model that's going to forecast, what we'd like to do is really tie out, rather than our own forecast, tie out our numbers to the Department of Finance, which does do forecasts for different areas of the state. So these are the regional numbers in terms of population, jobs, and housing, and actually rely on those numbers for our process, at least for this round moving forward.
The only comment I would have is obviously there's a tremendous amount of work that's taking place to resolve this unfortunate issue that had occurred. I would suggest, I don't know quite how you do this, but to keep the public's eye on the fact that this is almost an impossible task that you're putting yourself, instructing yourself to do, to have any degree of accuracy 30, 40 years from now on the numbers. I mean, Ray has walked me through some of the sizable number of components within the forecasting model, each of which has a range of variability around it.
Right.
Some have high correlation, some have negative correlation. My concern is the amount of effort and energy going into this, and I've said it before, it's the work on the tail of the dog in terms of how much money you get to build the highways and transit programs around here. We really got to be way out of proportion. I don't know how we get the public recalibrated. What is meaningful and what is maybe not that accurate, and therefore not that meaningful.
Yeah, so we've had internal discussions about that, on how we explain, highly technical mathematical equations and transformations and stuff. So I think part of it is education on, what these are tools, what these models are and what they're not. So they're not predictors of the future. They are, like in terms of our transportation model, they're a tool that we use really at primarily at a regional level to look at different scenarios, investment scenarios, development scenarios that we can compare against one another. So we realize we need to do a better job both of educating the public, our board members as well.
You just have to be careful, because the more you explain, and it sounds more and more detailed, and there's the presumption that, it must be more and more accurate.
No,
yeah. Far from the case.
Complexity doesn't lend to accuracy all the time.
Anything else, Ariana?
No.
Any other questions for Ariana? Okay, thank you, Ariana. We'll move on to agenda number 9.
Mr. Chair, real quick, on item 7, on the major corridor report, I know that was part of the consent item. I just had a question related to 2 projects. In both instances, they say will be determined when funding is identified. The Coast Rail Encinitas, up in Carlsbad, I guess, area, or Encinitas. And then the I-556 interchange. I'm just curious, it says this project is not yet funded through the final design and construction. That's the I-556. Is that, I know that's a priority. When is that expected to be funded and how? Is that part of what?
Right, so what we mean by funding has not been identified is that it is part of the regional plan, the long-term plan. It's also part of the Transnet program. But it's the specific funding to move it forward to the next phase So we can program it into the RTIP and put it into our budget. That funding has not yet been identified, but it is part of our longer-term plan.
So when you say not identified, at what point will it be? Where does the money come from eventually? Is that a new tax that's coming? Or
Right, so I think, there's a lot of these projects.
the rest of the dog?
Yeah, so a lot of these projects, as they move forward, they achieve a certain readiness level, whether it's the environmental document or design ready or whatever. And so these projects are brought forward to compete. And so as we move more into this more competitive environment, less of a debt financed environment, these projects will need to compete for funds, state, federal funds, and then supplemented with regional funds.
Okay, if not, we'll move to number 9, where we have the City of San Francisco. City of San Diego. That's where I came from. That's a long time ago. City of San Diego, we have Hassan, Ben, and Marno. Sorry. I would ask you all to introduce yourselves and your role, and before we start, I might direct the attention of the committee to agenda item number 12, attachment number 2, which we are going to get to later on. But the City of San Diego line item there is, I think, could be the starting point for this discussion. And if I'm reading this correctly, and if I'm not, please someone correct me, as of September 30th, we at Transnet were sitting on some $35 million that the city has not yet requested. And of the money they've requested, this report we get, it doesn't really indicate how much you have, spent is not the right metric. Committed would be the right metric, because there's a time and a process between a commitment and actual spending. And our report also shows that by the end of this fiscal year, there will be, given what's held over from prior years and what should come from the tax receipts during the year, some $59 million available for you. And I'm also told that given the new state initiative, you will also be receiving a chunk of money for similar purposes for the state, and you might comment on the relative size of that expected dollar package versus the dollar package we have here. Because I'm told, and I don't know whether it's correct, that might be even bigger amount of money than what you have available here. So with those are broad questions to serve as an orientation for whatever you're going to share with us, please, the floor is yours.
Good morning. My name is Hassan Yusuf. I'm Interim Assistant Director of Transportation and Stormwater Department. And as you have requested, we have limited the number of city staff attending this meeting. So we have Ben Italia, who is the Administrative Services and Fiscal Manager with the Transportation and Stormwater Department. Myrna Dayton, she's the Assistant Director of the Transportation Public Works Department. And Adam Jones, Interim Capital Budget Coordinator with the Financial Management Department. There is also some former city staff here, but we will not be considered.
Can you clarify what the role of the stormwater function in relation to this? Did I miss something there?
The department is the transportation and stormwater.
Sorry, I didn't hear the transportation part.
Yeah.
Got it.
The transportation is a big one, the first one.
I got it. I heard the little one. Sorry.
Okay, so this is the annual reporting on the status of the transit funds that the City of San Diego prepares each year. And we have heard your questions. We actually received some of these questions in advance, and hopefully we will be addressing these questions throughout the report. We will be happy to answer questions at the end of the report. We will share with you the status of the transit funds here today. We will look back at fiscal year 2017, see what we have projected to expend and what were the actual expenditures. We will also look ahead at what we have planned for fiscal year 2018. With that, I will turn it over to Ben to go through the report.
Okay, so the City of San Diego receives approximately 38% of local streets and roads Transnet revenue. With the implementation of our recent cash management strategies, the city has made significant progress in spending Transnet cash on priority projects over the last 3 years. This table here is a snapshot of the current fiscal year's projection, as well as the prior 2 fiscal years' activity. It shows that the city has decreased its balance at Sandad by approximately $22 million since 2016. We project to decrease the remaining balance by an additional $3 million by the end of fiscal year 18, as shown in the table. Our projected ending balance at Sandag at fiscal year end will be less than one year's total allocation. Through the first quarter of this current fiscal year 2018, CIP expenditures totaled about $3 million, and over $9 million has been encumbered in projects. The city is also on track to fully expend its maintenance, administration, and project implementation budgets by the end of the year.
What is a typical quarter? 3 million sounds pretty small.
3 million is small. Typically, the first 3 months of the year, expenditures are very low. Our expenditures ramp up throughout the year.
Why is that?
A few factors. One, the purchasing system is pretty much dark in July, so we don't expend very much in July. But this is just as a city. So we really only have August and September for expenditures. That's one of the main reasons.
Dark for vacations, I assume?
Not vacations, so it just has to do with the accounting system.
Year end.
The year end, yeah, exactly. For fiscal year 17 to 18 turnover.
Wow.
But the expenditures do definitely ramp up throughout the second half of the year.
And just for clarity, year end meaning that people are focusing on closing the books for the year. And
Fiscal
so,
year.
gotcha.
And then creating all the purchase orders for the next fiscal year. That takes some time. Did I answer your question? Okay. Last year, this committee requested a look back at how we did compared to how we thought we would do in fiscal year 2017. Our fiscal year 2017 projections were approximately $43 million, and our actual expenditures were $37 million. The $6 million difference was primarily as a result of construction delays on Old Otay Mesa Road and land acquisition and environmental approval delays on the Otay truck route phase 4. I'll go into a little bit more detail on specific projects on the next slide.
Here you're speaking of literally expenditures.
Expenditures, correct.
Well, if a project is approved, it's underway and it gets delayed, your expenditures lag, but that's
It'll happen.
somewhat beyond your control.
Exactly.
Whereas the money has been committed. If you're projected, that was measured in expenditures, not commitments or whatever terminology you guys use.
That's correct. So we anticipate these expenditures to occur this fiscal year as opposed to last fiscal year.
I'm just curious whether a better metric, at least for our purposes, is we give you money and we expect you to get it committed. A project might be a long-term project, fine, it's going to take a long time to spend the money, but the actual expenditure rate isn't terribly relevant to us, is how quickly can you get the money committed to get things done.
The money is committed to these projects.
I'm saying that might be in the future more relevant to at least show the money available and how fast you get it committed. How fast you spend it is a whole different set of variables.
Understood. Thank you.
And we have a list of projects that we have money committed to it. We distributed that, I believe, prior to the meeting. And it shows all the money committed to multiple projects throughout the city. So all of the funding that you have with Sandag is all committed to projects.
When I say committed, and again, it's just a terminology, a mental commitment that we have this list of projects we want to do, that's to me not a commitment. A commitment is when I started the process, I got a certain time.
Encumbered in a project.
Encumbered this project, I guess, in your lexicon. Yes, that would be the measurement to me to know how fast you're using your money, encumbered it.
Okay, thank you.
And also, if I can, for clarity, and it's a little bit, it's pretty much related to the point that Dick's making, and maybe Tracy, if you can clarify. So in the attachment to in agenda item 12, which is that chart that we often refer to that shows the percentage of spent versus monies provided, column H, which refers to remaining programming, is that the programming amount here is in effect what is programmed to be spent in fiscal 18, or is it programmed in fiscal 18 and the spending actually could occur in subsequent years as well? So it's not purely, to Dick's point, a forecast of expenditure in the fiscal year. Does my question make sense?
Yeah, it's the latter. So the $59 million that you're seeing here, we don't expect to expend that entire $59 million in 18, but that full amount is allocated, budgeted in the projects.
Right. Okay. Just, I think, and I know, Tracy, we spent a lot of time on this chart. I think it may be that in some respects, even just sort of the headings or the way that the chart is describing the monies may cause a little bit of confusion on our part sometimes because, again, just to look at it on the face, when you see remaining programming fiscal 18, even reading the footnote, it sort of almost leads you to believe that that's an amount that's intended to be spent in that year, but as you're clarifying, it's not necessarily the case. Similarly with item J, I think that's also a little bit confusing as well, but we can talk about that separately.
Tracy, would you speak to that, because I'm confused now. That's not what I thought it was. I thought this is not his number, this is your number.
This is our number. Right, so, and I might need help still on this. So the column H, the programming, that's what the jurisdictions program in the RTIP. So that's what they're telling us that they're expecting to draw for their Transnet in the given year, based on their budget and what their expectations are.
The difference
Sure, it was right. I was wrong then. I thought it was something.
The difference is that the Transnet is drawn down, not necessarily spent. The city can hold the money, they could draw it ahead of time, or they can reimburse themselves.
This is input from them. I thought this was nothing more than a mechanical number from us saying
well,
how much more
it's from them at the point that they add it to the RTIP. That we do not reach out to them each quarter to gather this number. This is from us, from our programming division. Will provide these numbers to us.
It's a number that originates from the city.
Yes.
Yes.
I was wrong. Thank you.
Program in there.
Okay, Ben. Okay, comes back to you.
Perfect. Okay, moving on to the next slide here. These are some the specific projects that we had projected and brought forward to you last year at this time. So I wanted to give you an update on how we did. The first is Avenue de Nova Playa. So the projection was based on an estimate of the cost of the construction at the time. It also included some contingency, and the actual costs were lower than projected. So we projected $5 million. We actually spent $4.6 million of Transnet, so not a huge variance there. The next one is Old Otay Mesa Road, Westerly. The projection was $4.8 million. We actually spent $2.9 million. The project expended enterprise funds for a newly added water transmission line first. So this was added to the scope of the project. Transnet expenditures are expected to catch up this fiscal year. There were also delays in construction due to unsuitable existing soils on the site. So those are the reasons why expenditures were delayed. Next is Otay Mesa Truck Route Phase 4. The project is currently being rescoped. There have been delays in obtaining environmental approvals. We have projected $3.7 million. In actuality, we spent $300,000. And then finally, State Route 163 Friars Road. You may notice that there is construction happening right now. Our projection for Transnet was $2 million. We actually spent $3.1 million. We maximized Transnet expenditures in the project. What that means is that Transnet was expended before all other funding sources in the project. We also have resurfacing of city streets. Or sorry, this is our these are some of our major planned expenditures for FY18. So moving on to this fiscal year, we expect to expend $4 million of Transnet on street resurfacing. So this is the overlay. We expect to expend $3.5 million for construction of Old Otay Mesa Road. Also an additional $2 million for construction on State Route 163 and Friars Road. For State Route 94 Euclid Avenue interchange, we anticipate to expend $2 million for construction. For traffic signals, for new modifications as well as our interconnect system, we expect to expend $1.5 million for construction. And finally, for Torrey Pines Road improvements Phase 2, we anticipate to expend $1 million on construction.
Can you go on the resurfacing of the city streets? Can you, because I know there was a press coverage quite a bit the other day with the mayor on this plan of 1,000 miles of roads. How much is the city spending in relation to to that as well? I mean, that's obviously some general fund. Is that general fund money coming in too, or is that Transnet only?
No, Transnet is actually a very small amount. We do have a sizable amount of lease revenue bonds that we're spending down. That's a primary funding source for our resurfacing. Looking into next year and years beyond, we're looking at additional bond financing.
This $4 million is which? Is this just a small?
This is just Transnet.
Just a small.
Exactly.
Do you have a rough ballpark number for what the aggregate is that's being devoted to this?
I think it's close to $80 million total for overlay as well as slurry seal maintenance.
On an annual basis?
On an annual basis, yeah. The goal this year is to resurface approximately 349 miles of road.
Very critical you keep that number in front of the public versus this $4 million thing.
Yeah, this is just a small piece of it.
That sounds like maybe problem.
On the old Otay Mesa Road project, the look back slide, you had the 4.8 million projected and you spent almost 3.
Yes.
And then you've got another 3.5.
Right.
Did you reallocate money from a different project to put it into this, or how does?
No, the funding was already there. Our projection of 4.8 is not the total Transnet budget, it's just what we thought we would expend of the total Transnet budget.
But would I be right in assuming any one of these particular projects you listed, the Transnet piece is not the whole?
That's correct.
So money can come and go if your other sources are replacing that or detracting from it. It really doesn't.
That's exactly right.
I think the project for Otay is approximately $13 million.
It's very high for a small facility.
I'm curious of the characterization of these 6 on the 2 slides as the fiscal 2018 major planned expenditures. Are these just 6 examples of a longer list of major expenditures? Because this adds up only to $14 million, and if this is the totality of major projects with $34 million in cash and 14 devoted to major projects, it seems like that's still a whole heck of a lot of money.
Yeah, so you should have a handout. It's called FY18 Transit Funded Projects in front of you.
Right.
There's about 200 projects here. These are all funded by Transit, and they're all in different phases. We get about $19 million a year of Transit for our CIP program, and this is really what we're talking about here. So of the $19 million, we're showing about $14 million this year. The other $5 to $6 million is just scattered throughout these other 200 projects.
Gotcha.
And again, there's additional funding coming from the city, not just transit money on each and every one of them.
Yeah, just about every single project has multiple funding sources.
Oh, so the numbers you're showing here are total amounts and not just Transnet?
This is just Transnet.
That's just Transnet.
And projected for that 1 year only.
Let me say something if I can.
Please do.
The performance audit of about 3-4 years ago hit you folks pretty hard because you were way behind in spending. And I took on the assignment of working with you and following you and attending meetings and seeing what you could do to better plan your work. We didn't know exactly what the problem was, so I'm very pleased with what I see. I've been pushing for something like this, a backlog of work of what you'd be doing each year, and it's finally appeared, and I'm delighted. Now, if I can nitpick just for a second, I happen to study the RTIP fairly regularly whenever something comes up. And for example, you're showing resurfacing of city streets of $4 million, and your RTIP shows about $2 million in this particular job called street resurfacing citywide. My question is, do you do any coordination between the RTIP, or is this the more current? Do you tie this into the numbers you've got in your RTIP?
We do, yeah. So the RTIP matches our budget. We always want to make sure that they're in sync. So our total transit budget for resurfacing the city streets is $4 million.
Is what?
$4 million. And we plan to fully expend the
What am I looking at? This is amendment number 8, which we got last meeting, which shows $2,067,000 I'm nitpicking, excuse me.
I think there are two projects, one for resurfacing, one for the overlay on Fiscal.
Excuse me?
I think there are two projects for street resurfacing, so
Can you
one
come
for
up to
overlay,
the-
one for Fiscal.
It wouldn't be slurry seal, there might be one for concrete streets. So we've combined concrete streets and asphalt overlay as one
Yeah.
resurfacing
There's
fund.
multiple projects for
All right, so you're
street
saying
resurfacing.
this
so
is just asphalt,
that's-
and that work, those
That's the one
costs
that was
could
amended.
include some concrete.
Exactly.
Could be concrete or street reconstruction.
All right, but at any rate, in summary, I've been on this committee for, what, 5, 6 years, and I'm delighted with the progress that you've been making, including the reduction of the funds that you've been holding. We'd love to see you drop it down below the 33 million, but we'll take 4 million at this time, representing the taxpayers, of course.
We're working on it.
Right, and I also did see this particular article in the paper. I even saw our mayor on television a couple of days ago. He was taking credit for everything, which is fine. That's his position, and he is in charge. But I'm delighted you've been repaving the streets in my neighborhood, which happened to be the mayor's neighborhood also.
I have nothing to do with the mayor.
No, I used to live in Kensington when Jerry Sanders was the mayor, and we got our streets paved.
It's really difficult for Jonathan, because every time there's a new mayor, he has to move.
All right, that really summarizes what I wanted to say. I'm delighted with this backlog of work that you're planning to work on, specifically under each of your city ID numbers.
This is high praise, because Jonathan has been our anointed critic of
Thank
this
you, we
problem.
appreciate that.
He follows it very closely. I have one question, though, is how do you prioritize the use of your multiple sources of funds? You have Transnet and you have one or more other sources within the city. Is there a logic to, particularly if we're ahead of schedule and there's a slowdown or what otherwise, why would you not be drawing all the transit money and using your other, quote, city general fund money elsewhere?
It really depends. We have, like I mentioned before, we have lease revenue bonds. We have a specific deadline where we have to expend all of those. So we want to spend that first. Transit is probably a close second or third. We want to spend down our transit as much as possible.
Doesn't expire.
Exactly. It doesn't expire. But our general fund or capital outlay type funds, those will be the last to spend.
And you've asked us to share some of the projects we're working with you. So we have some pictures for you and actually show you what we're doing here. It's good stuff, all good stuff. So this is 1 Street. We have replaced the concrete pavement on 1 Street about 2/3 of a mile approximately in length. If you have seen 1 Street before, it was sliced every foot, curb to curb. There was just utility trenches everywhere. It was in very bad disrepair. So this is a project actually that constructed curbs and gutters, new curb ramps, sidewalks on both sides, underground utilities, and construction of new storm drain to replace the existing deteriorated drain. This is a great example of the city's one big strategy, including coordination between all the parties involved, including the private utilities and the city departments, and everybody else who has anything to do with the street, to ensure that once we pave the street, it will remain paved for a long, long time without being trenched. So this is a great example of what we're doing here with the transit funds. This was fully transit, I think it was fully funded with transit, or did it have other funding? There were other funding. And this is Old Otay Mesa Road. We just spoke about it. I'm going to tell you the story about this street. It started with a request from an adjacent school to install a temporary sidewalk, 200 feet long. And that's how this project started. And to tell you how things evolved in the city, the project evolved to a $13 million project that involved completely redesigning the street into a 2-lane collector street with buffered bike lanes, installing sidewalks on both sides, driveways, curb ramps, bar rock, retaining walls, street lights, guardrails, and a new stormwater drainage system. So And I know it's a short distance that you mentioned. The street is developed on both sides by developers. This was the missing section here where children were walking on the street in a very dangerous condition. Now the street is, when will it be completed? We have,
I believe it, oh my God, August 2018, I believe. We're delayed due to, we also decided to add a water loop system in there. It was scheduled to be there in 2025, but due to the grid that we're putting in between the soils and the retaining walls, it was really, we were able to convince the Public Utilities Department that this was the right time to install the water main.
So that's part of the coordination that takes place on these projects. And the next one is Streamview Drive improvements. This project provided capacity and safety improvements on Streamview Drive between Lynn and Michael Streets and Gale Streets. Improvements included installation of new traffic circles, raised median sidewalks, and curbs and ramps. You can see the difference between before and after. And the next one, this is our most popular transportation project, which is street repair. And you've seen the mayor a couple of days ago talking about it. The mayor had a goal of repairing 1,000 miles of streets over a 5-year period, starting in fiscal year 2016. And I want to tell you, in fiscal year 2016, we paved approximately 330 miles, that including overlay and slurry sealing. In fiscal year 17, 267 miles. And in fiscal year to date, about 60 miles. We anticipate to complete about 308 miles this fiscal year. This is about a total of approximately 650 miles from the mayor's goal. We will meet that goal and exceed it by the year 2020. Just to give you an idea of the improvements that are happening to our streets, our condition assessment survey conducted in the year 2011 showed an average overall condition index of 59. The assessment survey conducted in 2015, the average overall, the average condition index was 72, and we are planning on maintaining that average going forward with the funding levels we have.
72 is considered a nominal goal.
70 is good. 70 and above is good condition, and 39 to 69 is fair, and below that is poor condition.
And you put in perspective, of course, the 1,000-mile initiative. How many miles are there? That sounds like a huge number of miles. How many miles are there of roadways in the city?
We have, the network is approximately 3,000 miles of streets. Of that, there's a couple hundred miles of alleys, but the rest of it is concrete and asphalt streets.
So the initiative is covering, in essence, 1/3 of the total. And the average lifetime of once repaired and resurfaced, what are we looking at?
When we overlay a street, our goal is to overlay the streets every 21 years, and slurry seal them every 7 years.
7?
Every 7.
Trying to get a model, if you got a third in this 4 years, where do the other 2/3 get done before you have to redo the first third? And you're saying it's either 7 to 21 years. Huh?
How do you measure by center line miles or lane miles?
It's by center line miles.
Is there a list of streets
Well,
that are?
center line, you could have a 4-lane street, and that's.
What was the answer? I didn't hear it.
He said center line miles,
Yeah.
so that's a lot.
Yeah, that's a lot of miles.
Yeah.
Is there a list of streets that are planned for resurfacing on the city's website or anything like that?
I believe there is, yes. You can access the street division website, and you'll see the streets that have been completed, and the streets are planned in the future also.
We also have a map. If you haven't seen it, it's streets.sandiego.gov. And it's a map, and it shows exactly, every single street that's been slurry sealed or overlaid, or the concrete streets, what the condition looked like before and what the condition looks like now. It's a really interactive map.
And the interactive map doesn't show what's planned over the next X period of time.
The plan will be on the CIP viewer website. You can see what's planned ahead over the next couple of years.
My vague recollection is that along with these projects, there sort of a mandated best efforts basis with regard to sidewalk and bike lane work at the same time that street work is being done? Is that something that you guys are tracking in terms of when you're doing a street project? Are you tracking the extent to which you're also doing sidewalk work? And if there's any way to kind of gauge the progress in that regard as well?
Yeah, we will get into that at the very end. We'll talk about that a little bit about future processes. Right now, with the resurfacing projects, we install curb ramps with the overlay, and we also review the streets for improvements or installation of new bike lanes. Our goal is to install about 50 miles of bike lanes each year. So this is what we're looking at going forward in the future. I will be talking about that in a minute and how we're going to plan this process and look at all assets within the right-of-way. Okay, and I think this is the last one. This is Coast Boulevard sidewalk improvements, approximately 1,100 linear feet of sidewalk on west side of Coast Boulevard between Covey Street and Coast Boulevard. The project improved access to adjacent park, installed 2 accessible ramps to existing bench areas, and replaced damaged curb and gutter and street panel. And here's, after giving you all this report, I want to tell you what we are going to be doing in the future. Our goal is to ensure funding is allocated to maximize expenditures. Financial management, twice per year, they have a consolidated action that they take to council where they transfer budgets between projects based on requests from the departments. We move budgets from projects that they will not be able to spend for one reason or another. We move into projects that are in need of that budget, that it will be expended within that fiscal year. This has been a great practice. This is not the only time when we move budget. This is what 2 big actions by financial management for all the city departments, but also within the transportation and stormwater department. We move budgets as needed, from one project to another by taking separate actions to the city council. We continue to review and streamline the project execution processes. We enhance the level of coordination between the departments involved in project execution to ensure timely delivery of projects. We're bundling projects to ensure minimal impacts to the street in conformance with the city's one big policy. And this is what I wanted to talk to you about. Over the past couple of years, the city has been working on an infrastructure asset management project citywide. This is a very large project that involves every department in the city of San Diego. We expect implementation to start with the Department of IT Communication Division and the Facilities Maintenance Division at the end of this year, somewhere around mid-December, with Public Works and Transportation and Stormwater and Public Utilities Department to join in March of 2018. What is this going to do? A new planning group is going to be created in the Public Works Department. Now, the asset managing departments such as the Transportation and Stormwater Department, Public Utilities Department, for example, will do the condition assessment of their assets, will prioritize their needs list, and they will turn it over to the Public Works Department, new created planning group. This group will take all the projects from all the departments and review them and try to bundle. They will prioritize the projects. They will coordinate all these projects to ensure there are no conflicts with other projects within the right-of-way. And they will bundle these projects and put them out for construction. They will design them and put them out for construction. This is going to be a process going to be phased in. By the time we fully implement this process, it will take about 2 years to do that. And the reason we're sharing this with you because, right now we're doing, for example, street paving separate contracts. The future process could be that we would take the paving component and add it to any group job involving water, sidewalks, sewer, and all the other assets, street lights, traffic signals, and at the very end, the street will be paved as part of the overall big project. this can potentially impact our transit expenditures. It may create some delays when we get into that. Eventually, we'll pick up, but as we phase into this project, our expenditures may be impacted somehow. And that concludes our
That's very encouraging to hear. Obviously, the objective, if you can fulfill it, would be a wonderful achievement. I assume there's many other cities around this country that face this same challenge all the time, and presumably some of those have solved this problem. If you're developing your program, have you been benchmarking against others to see what problems they've encountered and how they've overcome them, or is this just a pure vanilla brand new effort?
I believe our group that's in charge of managing this large program has been in touch with different cities, trying to take, from their lessons learned and try to avoid issues here within the city of San Diego. We believe once this program is implemented, it will be a great mechanism for managing our asset and projecting future needs for maintenance and replacement and coordinating all the city projects together.
The big challenge I envision from afar is that this doesn't get so bureaucratic it stalls everything out because it's so complex and nothing gets done. So that
we are fully aware of that, and we're trying to ensure that this doesn't happen. Well, we need to get into it and see how that works, and we'll continue to make improvements.
Swim with it.
Thank you, Hassan. Nobody likes to see a repaved street suddenly get dug up to put a utility line in. But one of the problems that you used to have, I believe, was in delivery when it came down to paving. You used to have incremental projects, and then you changed, I believe, to sort of an open-ended job order contract, in which you were able to award, I think it was up to $10 million worth of paving, which is one reason why we've been booming along in the city with getting all these streets paved. You don't have to design it and bid it. You have one contractor, he's giving you a square foot or whatever unit price, and then you just decide where to put it based upon need. Now, what you're saying right now, if you turn this over to group jobs, those are pretty specific that I've seen. A new water line or sewer line on certain streets. Are you going backwards, or are you going to have an open-ended paving contractor that you can just sick him onto the group job after the utility work is done?
Very good question, Mr. Tibbetts. We have thought about that too. We know if a street is in need of repair, you're going to put it at the end of a project that may take 5 years to implement because it involves every asset within the public right of way. It can create some issues. For that particular project, I think we will need to not pave the street and have the other projects come in and dig out the streets. It will be at the end of this project. But there will be situations where you have no projects, but the streets are in need of repair. We are looking at just bundling those streets together, continue the same existing process, and continue to put out contracts for street repair only, in addition to adding streets to the other contracts.
I know you know what you're doing. You've had enough experience. Just be aware that we are concerned about this also.
Anything else you want to share with us? Anything else you need to share?
No, this concludes our report, and we appreciate you giving us the time to do this, and we're happy to continue to answer questions.
I just have a question, considering this next item on the agenda, using commercial paper to fund a shortfall. I know, for instance, in the Otay Mesa area, it's been suggested a lot of times to try and borrow against future transit dollars, and the city has not, to my knowledge, at least in that area, has not ever considered doing that. Is that something that you guys do and would do, or have a track record of doing, anything like that?
We haven't in a while. And the reason was because we wanted to draw down our cash sitting at Sandbag first. I think we're kind of at that point now. Interestingly enough, we have had some discussions with Sandbag about possibly using commercial paper for one of our large bridge projects right now, and that is West Mission Bay Drive Bridge over San Diego River. Very large project. It's mostly federal funded. But we are in that discussion right now with Sandbag, and we are looking at possibly using it in the future as needed.
Now, when you say, I'm sorry to bring this back up, but the 35 million cash balance, is that committed or is that uncommitted dollars?
So it is allocated to projects, all of it, everything that's, so the entire 59 million actually that's programmed in the RTIP, that's all allocated to projects. I think about 14 or 15 million is encumbered at this point.
Your definition of encumbered then, does that mean someone's officially said we pledged that money to the project, or is it actually started with a purchase order?
It's in a purchase order. It's under contract.
It's real.
Exactly, yes.
And the reason you can't spend all of it, why is that balance not zero? Is it because of the construction delays, or what's the reason?
You know, and that question comes up a lot. You know, I think one of the reasons is we want to get as close to zero as possible, but we never want to be at zero. Because if our expenditures start to increase on the city side, and we're at zero or very close to zero cash, we won't be able to draw down that cash. So we'll be going negative in our account. Does that make sense?
Related to that, and correct me if I'm wrong, but my recollection was in the past when the balance was substantially even greater than this, one of the reasons given was that the city actually didn't fully have the manpower or the person power to actually execute all of the projects, and that was coming out of the Great Recession. And I'm wondering if at this point, there's been additional hire, or you're sort of where you want to be in terms of staffing to actually be executing projects on a more timely basis.
In the last 3 years, our Public Works Department that is managing the CIP, about 95% of the CIP throughout the city, has been growing significantly in the last 3 years. I think we've hired over 250 people in the last 3 years, either in new positions or new to the city. So we are definitely managing a CIP program now that 5 years ago was in the 200 million and is now, just in December, we're going to execute 300 million of CIP projects. We think this year we're going to hit 650 million. So we are definitely ramping up. We've augmented with a lot more consultants, both in the construction side and the design side. So we're ramping up pretty quick and doing pretty well in executing right now.
Okay, so lack of capacity to simply process and execute is no longer part of the...
We seem to have our finger pretty good on it right now.
Great.
If it goes any bigger than 650, I think we have to scratch our head and go back to the drawing board. But right now, we're like I said, last year we executed over 500 million in CIP. This year, just in December, it'll be 300 million. Never done before. So we're doing
Not only did you increase your personnel, but you've also changed your processes.
Yes, we have more tools in the toolbox. We've got Jog, we've got Max. We have all kinds of different delivery methods that have really helped all of us.
I just also want to point out that transit is also a small portion of this 500 million. It's not the focus of this room, but it will be included in some of the projects.
A quick comment and a quick question, please. What I have learned over the last few years, the quick comment is that these folks have, and I hope you still have, 9 pothole crews, one for each district. And these folks are just circulating, looking for potholes. Either potholes that have been turned in, people have complained, or potholes that they see in their area that they're driving continually, so that they are trying to maintain potholes in a smart way. My second quick question, at an earlier meeting, we asked somebody what he wanted to carry over. What sort of carryover balance did he want at the end of each year? What was his goal? And I think the answer at that time was about $30 million for the flexibility that you mentioned, Jim. Do you still agree with that? And that sort of gives a feel as to where you folks would like to be at the end of each year. Is it still 30 million each year?
Yeah, I think it's about 30 million.
It's 1 year's allocation. We'd like to spend what we get in a fiscal year.
Of course.
So we want to keep 1 year's worth of allocation. But, you know, it's not necessarily we want to keep that, but, you know, if we can draw that down even further, we will. But like Ben said, we don't want to go down to zero, but if we get it close, like $10 million or so, I think that would be the ultimate goal.
All right. Thank you.
Good. Any other questions?
Happy to see the, like, the Friars 163, entertainment down the books forever, and I drive that way every day, and
I know
the
that.
only unfortunate thing is they started it right before the holidays, so I'll avoid it for a few months, but it's gonna be a zoo.
I did want to address one of your questions you had at the beginning. You had asked about the SB1 funding, the new state funding, and how that would affect Transnet. So the city is getting about $8 million in RMRA funding, road maintenance rehabilitation account funding. That full $8 million is going to be used solely for slurry seal maintenance. We don't use Transnet for slurry seal maintenance, so there will be no effect on our Transnet spend rate because of this additional $8 million that we're getting this year.
It's 8 million versus the some 30+ million you get from us every year. So
Exactly.
I thought it was a multiple of what you're getting, unless it's a fraction of what you're getting.
It is. And that's our projection for this year. It's going to be increasing pretty steadily over the next couple of years, up to about 20-25 million over the next few years, which will be really, really great for us.
And I want to talk about potholes. You know, we still have 9 crews, and as a matter of fact, a few months ago our backlog was really high, and then now we're down to a couple of days of response time.
So 2-day response.
Yeah, we are very good. We're making very good progress, and we have requested 2 additional crews in the next fiscal year, and we hope to get it. We don't know yet, but you know, we are trying to increase the number.
They're saying if a citizen comes in a complaint, the first one of these crews will go assess it to see if it's real, and if it's real, they can fix it in 2 days.
That was the latest information I got from Street Division. You know, that fluctuates depending on the number of requests coming in. But as of today, it's very, very short.
You know, Dick's gonna make a couple of calls, right?
Yeah. My wife sure will, when I tell her. Wow, that's impressive.
With that app.
We have the Get It Done app, and it's very, very popular, and we get a lot of requests through that.
Get it done.
Get it done. All right, we're getting it done. All right, well, if no other questions, we thank you. Ariana.
In terms of the plan of having the city staff come back and give you another presentation and
To at 12
requesting
months?
these every year, is that still something you'd like to see, or?
12 months.
Certainly no more frequent.
I think 12, we'd like to have an annual report, and this is I love this report, so please come back in 12 months with further success. Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Okay, moving on to number 9, so we're down to number 10, the city of Mesa's request to participate in the commercial paper program. As I understand this is a request for some $2 million. And I think the other important variable is how much is their annual drawdown from us to represent the collateral on that loan.
Yes, so this is a request for $2 million of commercial paper borrowing by the city of La Mesa. First I'm going to talk about the debt program itself and commercial paper, just to kind of give you some background on this. So we do have the Sandak Transnet debt program, which is mostly our bonds, but we also have the short-term commercial paper program. The board has authorized us up to $100 million. However, right now the program we have is at $75 million because we find that that's really the usable amount that we need in a given year. Our current capacity, so the available within the 75 million is 44.45 million. We have NCTD as a chunk of the 75, and then the city of Oceanside, they requested to borrow 5 million. I believe it was last year, and they've just started drawing against that, so I backed that out as well. This is open to our local jurisdictions. And there are some requirements that have to be met in order to get to this point that we are at today. First, it has to be a congestion relief project, transit eligible. The life of the asset must exceed the repayment period and not less than 10 years is what we're looking for. We're looking for a benefit, economic or community benefit, it could be both. We want enough capacity of the annual allocations to cover both principal and interest. No private use of the asset because there are SEC requirements on that, and we don't want to have to deal with that, that piece. And we also want the city's council approval of the commercial paper use and our memorandum of agreement terms. And once all of these requirements are met, then we come here before you. We also go to the Transportation Committee and ultimately the Board of Directors for approval. The project must also be included in the RTIP. If it's already in the RTIP, then we look for an amendment to put the CP in there, or it just needs to be added to the RTIP. And once we get through that process, then we execute the memorandum of agreement, and then we can start issuing commercial papers, always on a reimbursement basis. And when the reimbursements are requested, we do ask that the jurisdiction submit all of their payment documentation so that we can ensure that it's being used for the project requested and that it meets all of the requirements. So now I'm going to talk about the project. So this is for the Westerly Mesa Improvement Project. It is going to be linking 4 schools and the city park by completing more than 4.8 miles of bicycle and pedestrian enhancements. And that's where our community benefit is. They'll be providing safety enhancements, so all of the children now will have a safer route to school and the parks. They are requesting $2 million of commercial paper borrowing to be repaid over a 5-year period. This is for two reasons. One would be to provide a match for their state grant, which is a very large part of the funding for this, but also there's a funding gap. There was a cost increase of about $570,000, and so this would cover that additional cost increase. They also want to keep their other high priority projects ongoing that are either currently underway or are meant to within this 5-year period that are using a majority of their Transnet allocations. And in using commercial paper, they're advancing this project while not having to have a funding gap with another project or stopping a project. The capacity assessment that we do here at SANDAG, we use a 2.5% interest rate, and that's meant to cover both the interest on the commercial paper itself and also their proportionate share of program costs. Now we do use 2.5%. We have not reached that level in a number of years because the interest on CP is rather low. But we want to have something just in case the rates get high enough, and we want to make sure that our capacity analysis is going to ensure that there is enough funding available. One area that the city looked at was an economic benefit, and the Caltrans construction cost index is currently at 2.8%. And so comparing that against the 2.5% using kind of the same draw that we did in our capacity analysis provides about a $14,000 savings. It's not much, but it is something. And it also, you have to look at the community benefits, which is pretty major for the children in that neighborhood. The La Mesa City Council approved the use of the commercial paper on this project and the terms of the MOA at their October 10th meeting. This item is scheduled for review by the Transportation Committee on December 8th, and then it's scheduled for action at the board on December 15th. There is also an RTIP amendment that this item would be included in if it is approved by the board. That would be before your review in April of next year, and then also in April, that would go before the Transportation Committee for consideration. If all goes as planned and everything is approved, then we would execute the MOA at that time, and the city can start borrowing against the CP. So with all of that, we do have an action requested of the ITOC. The Independent Taxpayer Oversight Committee is asked to review and discuss the city's request to borrow $2 million of commercial paper. So we have with us today two members of our Public Works Department from the City of Mesa. We have Jeffrey Manchester, one of the engineers, and Richard Vita, he's the Director of Public Works and the city engineer, to respond to any questions that you may have.
I have two questions. Just to start off, you say there's an action required of us. The action is nothing more than to discuss. Is there any desired input from anybody else after we have our discussion?
Anybody else at Sandev or?
Yeah,
Well,
I'm wondering, still our
well,
action is to
we're always
discuss, so we
interested,
discuss, who cares?
right. So we want your input on this, and if, your thoughts, and if it could possibly cause something to change in our processes.
You're waiting for our input on it. The question it has, in participating in the commercial paper program, the interest rates vary with the market over the X years. Is it strictly a pass-through with an additional administrative fee on it, but Mesa will be paying what we're paying in the master program?
Absolutely, yes.
And it's fully collateralized by their draw on annual transit allocations to them.
Right, so I'll just tell you the process so you can understand how this works. So every month we receive our sales tax from the state. It actually goes to our trustee first before it comes to us. And so we send notification to the trustee on a monthly basis, and we say, we use the word withhold. We want you to withhold this amount of principal and this amount of interest for each of our bond series, as well as for our commercial paper. So they have the funding there on hand prior to the interest becoming due. And then they make the payment directly.
Have any questions on this topic?
I'm looking at your draft capacity analysis, and I don't understand it, Lisa.
Okay.
It's on page 7. I'm not trying to tie us up, but it looks to me as if the first 3 lines are income or revenue, and the last 5 lines are expenses. But it looks to me as if you are repaying that $2 million twice. And I just don't, you've got principal repayment, and then you've got CP disbursement.
Right. So the third line, the CP proceeds offsets the CP disbursements. We're just trying to show kind of a cash flow of what's expected. So when the city requests a reimbursement for payments they've already made, we receive the commercial paper proceeds and we pay it to them. So we're going to show the revenue coming in and then the revenue going out. So the proceeds is the funding coming in, and the disbursement is just payment to them.
But you understand it then, Lisa?
Yes, I do.
You just split your cash outflows, you split into 2 lines.
Yeah, but I
The
don't
regular
understand.
and the stuff that was related to
Related to this, yeah.
I don't understand why you're repaying, you have $2 million.
Right, and then over the course of the 5 years, you're also going to see the repayment on the principal itself.
I know, but if you repaid the principal, okay. Okay, you understand it.
Yes, yes.
That's it.
Any other questions?
So just to be clear, the real decision point is April, assuming that the time table.
With the art, right, so the board, we're asking the board in December to approve the borrowing and the execution of the MOA contingent upon the art amendment.
Okay, so then the question, so in effect, for lack of a better term, the board will be making a credit decision at the December meeting. So then the only question I would ask is that since the drawdown schedule suggests that $1.5 million of the $2 million wouldn't be drawn down to fiscal 19, is there either an opportunity for sort of like a credit update prior to letting them draw down the $1.5 million?
In what respect would you see us
In
doing
the
that?
respect that if the unforeseen circumstance that financially speaking, the city of La Mesa, craters between, December and when they're going to actually draw down the $1.5 million, there, arguably you would want to have a point in there where you could say, hey, wait a second, the credit picture has changed substantially. We may not want to let them draw the $1.5 million. I understand they need the commitment to get the other funds, right? That's what's driving.
Stuart, the way I understand this, there is no real credit issue. It's Spencer's money. It's just being circular. It's just the timing. It's not on a Mesa credit. It's the money we're going to give.
It's the money right. So it's out. It's
okay. I see what you're saying. Okay.
Yeah.
It never gets out of our pocket.
Yeah. No. Okay.
Right.
Gotcha. All right. I was looking at it incorrectly. Sorry. Never mind.
Like a banker or something.
Yeah. No. Okay.
It's our own money, so it's 100%.
Yeah. No, I got you. I got it.
Lisa's in control. You can enforce.
I've been doing this for years.
But you effectively enforce the repayment through the trustee. They never get the money. Never.
Oh,
gets,
they don't touch the money. We have control.
Yeah, no, I misinterpreted.
Yes.
You actually covered this earlier.
Yeah.
I misinterpreted what you said. Okay.
Okay.
Thanks.
Any further questions? If not, I'll entertain a motion to. I guess we don't need a motion.
I guess, yeah.
We've had the benefit of our discussion. We have no compelling points to make
Okay.
for your consideration. So thank you.
Thank you very much.
And thank you for the La Mesa folks that come here.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, the next agenda item is discussion of the 10-year look back, item number 11. And we have our outside auditor, our independent auditor, for our triennial audit, which also is going to be working on this project for the board. We are not directly involved, as I understand it, in this project. This is a project dictated by the board.
Yeah, and I can actually preface if that's okay.
If you'll give us an overview.
Before Kathy's presentation. So the 10-year review is an opportunity, as we mentioned, for the board to look back through and conduct a review of the overall projects and programs included in the Transnet ordinance. And it's also a chance for the board to look ahead to consider any changes that may be proposed to improve the program going forward. The review is a self-assessment that the board conducts, wearing its hat as the San Diego County Regional Transportation Commission. It's not an audit. As you know, the ordinance rests responsibility for both the triennial performance audit and the fiscal and compliance audits with the ITOC, and Kathy's going to be back as your performance auditor in March with the draft of your performance audit that's currently underway. And however, while the ordinance does state that the 10-year review is to be conducted by the board, there's also a role for the ITOC, and that is to provide recommendations as part of the 10-year review process to make improvements to the program going forward, which is why we're here today. And we will also bring the full report back to you once the board has had a chance to finalize that later this year. And then finally, Chair Fuller had discussed with Kathy the option of potentially drafting a brief letter from the ITOC with any preliminary feedback that you may have at this time as a committee for the board to consider. And we realize that you don't have the actual written report in front of you at this time, but based on what Kathy will be able to share with you today, the committee may wish to provide initial thoughts for the board's consideration. And if the committee chooses to do so, then those could be transmitted via a letter that Kathy would be prepared to assist you in drafting. And that could be provided to the board with any initial input based on your discussion today and for review by the board at its meeting next month.
So as I understand, there's really a couple issues in front of us, is whether we want to proactively submit our committee's thoughts and ideas as input into the study. And then I would assume and maybe request that if there is a point in time in the overall schedule that there is a draft report being prepared, whether we would get to review that to see whether that led to any comments we might have as to the direction of the report was taken.
Right, and you will get an opportunity also to participate and provide recommendations. So Kathy's going to talk about this, look back, look forward, right? This look back was really a data collection, data gathering effort, reviewing existing documentation and materials to see performance, looking back. And then looking forward, under the regional plan activities, that will be conducted. And there will also be opportunities, and we'll bring reports to you for your review and recommendation as well.
Any other questions before we get started? If not, Kathy, or turn it over to you, and then in the process, hopefully you'll apprise us of the expected schedule and the interface points for us involved.
Absolutely. So Ariana stole a little of our thunder, but I'm Kathy Brady, and I'm joined with Michael Nash and Leanne Liu. And we're with Schoberg Eveshane Consulting. We are your ITOC hired triennial performance auditors. So we have that engagement going on as well. But I'm going to try to do this as well as I can. The board also met and thought there could be some efficiencies achieved by having your performance auditor also do the look back portion of this 10-year review. So the ordinance itself requires this every 10 years. So the fiscal year 18 is the one coming up. And what they ask is to evaluate the performance of the overall program over previous 10 years and make revisions to expenditure plan to improve performance over the subsequent 10 years. So the way that the board decided to do was have this look back portion and a look forward portion. Our firm was asked to do the look back portion. And as Ariana said, it's really just gathering of existing information and looking back over the 10 plus years. The plus is going all the way back to 2005 when the early action program projects were started. So it's a little bit longer, so thank you. And then the look back is going to be done by Sandat. So what we wanted to do today is just give you a little status of where we are. Some of the challenge will be that it's not public yet. The report's still in draft, so we can't share that or the results of that. But we'll try to communicate what we are asked to do and share with you as much as we can about what the content of the report in high level will be. In general, we were asked to review all projects and programs, so that's implemented under the expenditure plan since the start. So that would be all the major corridor projects, grants, environmental, transit, highway, managed lanes, local streets and roads, transit operations, really any aspect of that Transnet expenditure plan. And part of it is at a very high level to identify some preliminary options and alternatives for the commission to consider when it's going forward with its regional plan. So they've timed the look back to be coincide with the audit because we look at the same areas, some of the same areas, as well as coincide with the look forward that will be feed into the regional plan update. The key thing is that we were asked to utilize and activate material in existence, so we were not asked to recreate or audit information. Just gather what's out there. Some of it's audited based on some of our own audits or other work that's been done, as well as other databases out there. Part of it, we were asked to compare performance in the San Diego region with peers, so we had to go out and get some information for some external databases for that. And then we're to provide some information which the commission and the board should consider as a part of their look forward. So I think Leanne will describe some of the specifics of what we were asked to do, part of our scope of work. And the left one. Left click.
So as Kathy described the objectives, I'm going to describe to you kind of the areas or the focus areas, what we've been doing the past 3 months, and give you a little bit more detail on what we looked at. So the main area really is evaluation of performance, and it was for us looking at what Transnet has accomplished in the past 10 years in terms of performance outcomes and outputs. So for the output piece, it's really trying to gather a universe of all of the projects that Transnet has funded or touched in any way. So that includes, as Kathy mentioned, the major capital corridor construction, transit, and includes your EMP, local streets and roads, and all of your grant programs.
So we were trying to get number of projects and how much money has been spent on those projects over the past 10 years. So that's kind of the output data piece that we were gathering. The other side of the performance evaluation is more qualitative. So we were looking at outcomes. So all of the money that has been spent and the projects that were done, what has it achieved for the region in terms of, relieving congestion, increasing safety, or improving transit services for seniors, for example. So that is some of the data that we were gathering and that will be presented in the report. We've also sort of, because we're 10 years into the program, there's still 30 more years to go, trying to get kind of a status update with the universe of projects, what has been accomplished, where are we today, and what's left basically to be done. And if there's money left to be able to complete all of those projects. For all of the areas that we looked at, whether it was transit, freeway construction grants, we're trying to compare what CNF has done to peers, other MPOs, what's going on, best practices nationwide. So where available, we would gather that information as well. And then another area that we were looking at, that's kind of the bullet E, it's a financing, it's going to be a financing chapter, but basically look at how CNF compared in terms of leveraging transnet dollars with other dollars, because as City of San Diego mentioned earlier, transnet is a small piece of all the funding, but even though you get a small portion, you get to get credit for a lot of it. So we were trying to look at, with early action projects, how they use debt to accelerate the program and get things done sooner and where they are today. And then also the last bullet there is support of alternative modes of transportation. The landscape has changed in the past 10 years. We're not all driving anymore. There's rideshare services, Uber, your Lyfts. And then, there's smart growth, active transportation, bicyclists. So we're looking at what seeing that Transnet has accomplished in that area as well.
I just want to interject something of the difference, because we look at this as part of the audit as well. A lot of these areas. The look back review is just information on what happened of looking back over the last 10 years. It's not necessarily what it means, where there's areas for improvement, what could be done more effectively, efficiently. Those types of things are going to be developed more in the audit. So there would be some things that while we're doing the look back, we say, you need to investigate, do some more analysis in that area, gather more evidence. So we'll be doing that as part of the audit. So that the look back isn't necessarily going to have, this was good, this is bad, this needs to be fixed, this needs to be worked on. It's going to say what's happened over the last 10 years. There'll be some of that because there is some data that suggests things have worked well or areas that need to be improved, but most of that will occur in the audit.
A couple of comments before you leave this slide. To me, I think the area of most interest is, I know there'll be a substantial effort to document how much was spent, whether it was on schedule, so on and so forth. But the more important thing is what was achieved, and then you have that in there. But if there was some projection about how much commute time would improve, so on and so forth, and what is the current measurement, if in fact it wasn't what was expected, some explanation for why. Did we have that many more cars on there, and therefore we didn't gain any reduction in commute time, but we got a lot more people through the bottleneck, and so on and so forth? Because I hear a lot from the citizens that they see all this activity going on, but they don't really, at the end of the day, see any improvement in their commute. And there needs to be an explanation for, we spent all the money, we had da-da-da-da. And if the answer is simply, well, we got twice as many cars able to get through that bottleneck now than we had before, that's a benefit, even though it didn't reduce commute time. So to me, that's the important part. The other thing I would strongly request that when we, I remember E, where you're talking use of debt to accelerate projects, you can talk about all the benefits that have been achieved there, but hopefully there will also be some discussion about the negatives associated with debt, that we disenfranchised all the future taxpayers. They're going to get nothing for their tax dollars in the future because it's already been spent. And as I said before, maybe by the time we get there, it's been spent on things that are obsolete because we have driverless cars and need totally different stuff and there's no more transnet money to achieve that. So I think that's something that, with the rapid rate of technological change that's happened in the last 5 years, is something that the board really ought to consider when they're looking forward to whether they should spend any more debt and need those future tax dollars to be for future projects and not current projects.
I think you just click the left one, the left. There we go. Oh, no.
So the other area that we're, aside from the performance outcome and output fees, we're also looking at financial capacity. So basically, the financial decisions that CNDAG has made over the past 10 years and the models that they have used and how that has impacted the program. So especially now where they're transitioning from more of a debt financing, borrowing money to complete projects towards a saving up the table model, we're looking at that and describe that in the report. And we'll also be describing the challenges and the opportunities that relate to that with regard to funding left to complete the remaining projects. And then also looking at how the revenue and assumptions and project cost estimates have impacted projects and the whole pool of money that's available to complete projects. The other area that is important is all the things that are kind of out of the control of CNDAG or Transnet, which would be like your external policy or regulations. And those are just two key items that we have under A and B. One is reporting requirements under MAP 21 and FAST Act. Those are federal requirements where they, it started in 2012 and it's still in process of being implemented, but it basically transitions to a more performance-based transportation planning and programming approach where you have to establish targets and goals and have metrics to measure that. So funding will be sort of based on that as well, but it's really the Caltrans and the CNDAGs across the nations working together with the feds to try to identify those goals and targets and how that will be measured in the future. Then item B, which is as the state SB1, and City of San Diego mentioned, they're getting $8 million from SB1 this year. And that could change because it gives additional funding for local streets and roads as well as highways to for rehabilitation and maintenance. So that could affect the way Transnet funds is going to be leveraged as well. I guess another funding source for them. And then the other areas, I mentioned that briefly earlier, that the potential impact of disruptive technologies, it's a term, but it basically talks about autonomous cars, renter services, and how these new technologies affecting our travel behavior, because we're not just driving in our cars anymore, we have more options. So those are the areas that we are commenting on in the report, and as Kathy said, it's really gathering data and presenting that in the report for the look back portion.
Well, if it's a look back, when it talks about, I see reporting requirements under MAP 21 and FAST Act because that's sort of current, but funding opportunities such as SB1, so that's in the future really
right.
for us.
So there's a section in there that also asks for future considerations. So it's kind of like the look forward, helping seeing that when you're doing the second piece, to look forward things, maybe thinking
I get that. It's just interesting because that's a big subject. I mean, that's dollars. That's a big source of funding that's going to come in the region. That just seems like it's sort of not necessary to really look back. So I'm trying to figure out what the real reasoning would be to talk about that for the future that exists.
I think, no, I was going to say, I think part of it is, at the beginning of this, San Diego put forward a 40-year plan. And so some of that is going back and looking at the decisions they made at the initial stage and how those would play out over the long term. Well, now we're 10 years in, and so we can kind of evaluate what they thought the world would look like versus what it is. So we feel like that's kind of an important component to make sure that we are evaluating not only what happened in terms of dollars, but what happened in terms of decision making about the 40-year horizon.
Thank you.
And so October, we'll be giving you a little bit more detail on the specific chapters on how the report's going to be laid out and kind of like the timelines and you know where you're at and what the next steps are.
So we submitted a draft report to the SANDAG at the end of October. We're currently going through the process, kind of a parallel process of one, soliciting comments and feedback from them. You know, at this point in the report, what we want to do is get an agreement on the facts. So we want to make sure that the same things that we're seeing are consistent with what they're seeing. In addition to that, the report is also undergoing our internal quality control process. So, you know, if you think of the report as sort of the top of the pyramid, we're going through our work to make sure that the base is solid, that we've vetted the numbers, that the things that we say in the report agree with sort of the state of the world. And so you can see up here, we have the 6 chapters of the report, and I'll kind of just comment briefly on them. So the first is the changes in the transportation landscape. Again, speaking to that decision-making, we want to sort of situate what has happened in the context of the world around you. You know, this is stuff that's happened like the Great Recession, but also stuff that's going to happen like things like future SB1 funding. Just because we feel like that's important, what we don't want to do is get into results-oriented thinking of evaluating the decision based on what happened without the context that the decision was made in. So, you know, it's easy to say now that the Great Recession has happened, oh, maybe you should have done some things differently. It's an entirely different thing to evaluate it from what you could have known about the world at the time. You know, then of course we get into the accomplishments. So these are the outputs and outcomes, really trying to quantify what this Transnet program has brought to the region, both in terms of like miles of road, but also qualitative, as we were talking about, improvements that would be important to the citizens of San Diego. From there, we do discuss the alternative modes of transportation. You know, as people are transitioning away from car-based transportation, there are some other challenges that arise and some forward-thinking that needs to happen as a result. From there, we get into the sort of the oversight and governance of Transnet, and then some of the project delivery methods. This is where we're looking at, for example, project delivery on the Mid-Coast and some of the things that have been done, and some of the project delivery methods that are trying out, just to get at that project management level some of the accomplishments that have happened over the last 10 years. From there, obviously, we get into a big portion of it, which is financing, which again is not just what they chose to do or how they chose to pay for things, but the decisions that they made at the time, and how those have set the program up to be completed over its 40-year lifespan. So this is not just a consideration of what they've spent, but where they are in the process and their ability to deliver that whole program. And then finally, really it's that taking everything that we've done up to this point and then turning that to look forward and say, okay, this is where we're at. You know, we're one quarter of the way through the race. You know, is SANDAG on track where they expected to be? Are they not? And then I think that'll dovetail nicely with, once we get into the audit, some of the more formal recommendations. Of course, there are certain areas that, you know, we've identified some audit findings, but we've also identified that it makes sense to maybe move some of that discussion forward into that 10-year look back. So where appropriate, we are sort of commenting and making those recommendations, but the bulk of the critique will really happen in the audit. Any questions on that?
It's really challenging because we can't give you the results of it for you to, you know, to vet through us until it does go public. But if we look on the next couple slides, if you don't mind, so
Oh, yeah. The previous slide, the very first bullet was the draft report to SANDAG on 10/27/17. It's just a few weeks away. What will we be able to see then? We don't see it prior to it going to the board?
No, it will be. So what we're asked to do is present it to the Regional Planning Committee on December 1st, Transit Committee December 8th, and then the board on December 15th. So it will go public, and that's the same time that ITALC will see it. So it goes public.
Just the old publics.
Yeah, 21st, 22nd.
But that will give us time to digest it and see whether we have any input based on that.
Absolutely. So you'll have several stages where you're going to have input on this 10-year review.
Well, if I could, then that actually speaks to the December schedule. We don't typically have our meeting, so in effect, so we won't get to see this until after we have sort of left for the holidays.
In January.
Yeah, and so I guess that would be the
That's
question.
a very good question.
That we might want to chat about. Sorry to detract from the
Let's
presentation.
just pursue that so we have a frame of reference. I understand when you're making this public, there are various different steps in the process, but when is it too late for input from us? If we don't address this until our January meeting, is that going to be too late for it to be relevant?
Well, and Ariana might speak to this, but I think we have several opportunities to have input on the 10-year review, because ours is just a look back with data and facts. So it's the best information that's available. There wouldn't be a lot to have input on. We have a scope that we were asked to look at, and this is what the data says. There are a few items in there for future consideration to the board, and you would have input on those certainly in your January meeting. They're not making any decisions on this. Our look back is going to feed into Sandad's look forward, which is going to be done, probably, I don't know when, but probably the first part of the year. And so you'll be seeing it then. And then that's going to help guide them moving into their regional plan. So these are all just things to think about at the same time, because we'll be developing some of these more and have actual recommendations. That'll be going through our audit process. So, we have a subcommittee that meets on the audit, and then the audit goes to you in March for your input and discussion. So, I don't think the board's going to be making any decisions before that. So you will have periods of input on that, but not until the report's public.
Well, in your opinion, Ariana, we will have time if we meet in January, not until January, to digest and comment and still have our comments being relevant.
Yes, definitely to digest it, since it'll be posted and made public early December. And definitely at your January meeting, we have at least one regional plan item kind of kicking it off with ITALC, and then we can bring this report back to you at that point as well. And then remember that this is going to inform the look ahead, and there will be plenty of opportunities under the regional plan activities, because remember, the regional plan doesn't get adopted until October or fall 2019. And so you'll be seeing a lot of the regional plan folks here, and this 10-year will be coordinated with that effort. So.
And the review and the look forward is more, I think, wholesale changes if they want to make any to Transnet. Our audit's going to then focus down on things they can do along the way, and fixed processes and practices and other things that will be maybe similar, but may not require a huge board action to change the nature of the extension ordinance if the board sees fit. Yeah. So I think the decision or the challenging part today is whether or not ITALC wants to have a letter that accompanies the look back 10-year review that we do, written by your chair, with any input or comments you might have. Some of it might be some of the concerns that you have just in general and want to see the board consider. Maybe we could have something like that, and we could work with you to put those things in.
When would that letter need to be written?
In the next couple weeks.
Right.
So we kind of talked about these opportunities that you'll have. There's comments today that we can gather. We can always massage them into a letter and give back to you for your input. You'll have certainly a lot of input and comments on the audit that we do for you. Your subcommittee, we're meeting in December, that we'll talk about a lot of the issues, so we can get a lot of input at that point, and hopefully they know some of your comments too. And then I will come back to you publicly in March, as well as, like we talked about over the regional plan, you'll have opportunities at that point to shape the future. So then on the next slide, it's just really some of those step forms. So,
just as a question, so relating to the topic of whether ITALC would want to submit a letter, speaking to whatever thoughts or recommendations, I guess, Kim, if I could ask you, do you know, would there be any contemplated time at which the board would be reviewing this for sake of considering whether they want to make any changes to the ordinance going forward? Would there likely be a particular time, or would you characterize that as more of it'll just be sort of ongoing consideration?
And I don't think this necessarily, I don't know if we have anything plugged in specifically on based upon the 10-year look back and 10-year look forward that we've scheduled in an ordinance amendment. So it really depends what sort of comes out of this and what the board may or may not want to change. I do know that we do get ordinance amendment requests from time to time. And so we don't have anything formal submitted right now, but some of the things, for example, that the transit agencies have been talking to us about are that some of the capital needs, for example, in the North Coast or the coastal corridor, we allow, we're double tracking right now to plan for new service, but we don't buy trains for the existing service for replacement purposes. Transit always sort of provides funding for new coastal locomotives and cars if new service is going in, because it was intended to be new, not a replacement kind of. So, but we have been in discussions with, or North County, has a need in terms of replacing their coastal vehicles and locomotives and stuff. So we know that there's some needs out there that aren't directly addressed with transit ordinance. In the closer in the MTS service area, they're going through their transit operation optimization plan. They've seen declining ridership. They're trying to sort of right-size the system and service. Some of the things that are a significant cost of providing are the discounted fares, right? So if I'm a average everyday citizen, I can purchase a monthly bus pass for $72. If I'm a youth, that's discounted, and Sandag helps subsidize youth passes by half. So if the youth, my daughters, buy them at $36 a month bus pass that they can use anywhere in kind of the MTS system. For senior disabled Medicare, that dollar amount is actually, they only pay for 1/4. So you could buy, as a senior, an $18 bus pass. As the population ages, and the baby boomer population is aging, you're going to see a significant proportion of eligible folks. And so that is a bigger draw on kind of their operating costs. So we know there's some needs out there, and at some point they may come and say, hey, would the board consider raising the senior age? Or the senior age in the ordinance is maybe 62 or something. It's lower than even what the federal government considers senior. So there's definitely areas out there that the conditions are changing, things are different than when the ordinance was first written, that we may see on the horizon. But there's no, we don't have anything scheduled right now. It really is going to depend on how discussions go as we develop a long-range plan, as we learn what, how the program has performed for the last 10 years and where we kind of see the future of the next 10 years or so. So there is a likelihood that we could make some amendments. I don't have anything scheduled to say. So I think it's a role, it's as they come up.
So I think that ends anything that we were going to present. We wanted to have a conversation more about the potential for the letter.
Yes. Dustin wanted to make sure we got input from all of us as to whether we felt there was a need and purpose for us to submit a formal letter with our thoughts. I don't know, do you have an opinion?
I question if we have enough time. I mean, you're asking us to advise Sand, or to give our recommendations to Sandag Board over 10 years and you're giving us how many weeks? 2 weeks? And we're not even,
not me.
and we're not even meeting.
Preliminary thoughts.
Preliminary
It could be
thoughts.
a very simple, brief, preliminary thoughts, and we will look forward to seeing
Did the
actual
Sandag
report or
staff want to
something.
prepare some suggestions?
Well, let's ask a pragmatic question. Given the Brown Act and such, if we were to create a subcommittee to come to grips with whether we do want to, and if so, what we would want to say, but we need to vet it by the entire committee before we submit it out. Is there any way we can even do that in the next 2 weeks?
Suppose you...
I mean, in the real world, we just do emails back and forth and boom, 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 we can get consensus, but I don't think we're allowed to do that. So I don't even know how we
Why don't
would
we
proceed.
decide today whether we want to write the letter?
Yeah.
Which, I don't know what we comment on if we don't have the report, right? Unless all this stuff.
I have two axes to grind that I've mentioned here before. One we're well aware of, the other one I want to go into some detail in the next agenda item. But I don't know pragmatically how we would get it done. Because I'm not certain everybody would agree with me, first of all, and I don't even know how we would have a process to reach agreement on this agreement.
It doesn't start with a D.
Four-letter word and start.
Yeah. Has the staff seen the report? Have you seen the draft?
I have not seen.
I know we're still
Yeah, we received the draft in end of October, and we're still going through, comments, back to the Shelburne. So right now we're in the quality control assurance comments. And that
Well,
sort
you
of
know us pretty well. Could you, forsaking the Brown Act, I'm not sure how you do this.
So you have your performance audit subcommittee, which your chair is the chair of, so Dustin Fuller chairs that performance audit subcommittee.
We would have to delegate to that committee the full authority to draft a letter and send it off on our behalf without the rest of us seeing it. I think that's the only pragmatic way you could get it done, and that's probably satisfactory.
I actually unfortunately have to leave in a minute, but my 2 cents, and I can go either way on this, but my 2 cents is that we feel like we have the opportunity through our financial performance audits that we do on a more regular basis to provide feedback, and they obviously have all that data and can summarize where we've been over the last 10 years. And I'm not sure that we need to force ourselves into this process with additional comments, but if the majority of you feel like we do, I'm fine with that too.
Your thought is if and when we have comments,
it goes to
proper vehicle, you get it through our predictable triangle.
That's my thought. That's right. That's what we've been doing. I agree with you.
I do think, as Kathy mentioned, through your performance audit process, sort of all the sort of course corrections and process improvements we put in can be done through your normal process. It's whether or not through this anything big is sort of identified that would require a change to the ordinance. And so I don't see anything right now based upon horizon. So that's Stuart mentioned. I think those come up from time to time. There's no time frame on when those.
I've got one thing that relates to the report itself, which is not about the content, but really more the sort of style. I would just advocate strongly that, as opposed to the big thick binder, for sake of public consumption, that serious thought be given to something that is what I would characterize as kind of dashboard report card-like, meaning that, here's what the ordinance promised, and here's what's been delivered to date in very simple, easy to digest kinds of terms. I think that would be, very helpful for anybody who happens to be interested to try to actually, without having to get into the detail of it, really get something out of this whole effort. Because, one of the things that we've talked about in different contexts is just, from the public communication standpoint, how difficult it is for even somebody who's interested and committed to really grasp all of what goes on here. So that's the one thing I would say. And maybe you're planning to do some version of a summary, but I would really think about doing almost like a C-spot run, report, dashboard report card concept as part of this.
But in so doing, I would readily agree with that, but in so doing, the emphasis should be not inputs, but outputs. What was achieved? Now, we did this so many miles, that's nice, but what was achieved by doing so many miles? I don't know what the metrics are, reduced wait time, you guys have reports on that, the status of the commute, but how has that changed as a result of all these things that have been done?
And I think we'll cover those areas to the extent that data's available.
Okay, well, as far as the letter's concerned, I sense that we don't necessarily feel a need for it, but more importantly, we don't know how we can do it. The combination of those two, I think, is the answer to your question. There won't be one, but to the extent we have thoughts, we will want to get them incorporated into the
Yes, absolutely.
Given the fact that you might be leaving shortly before we get on our agenda item, let me just raise with you, if I can adequately articulate this, a concern that I would ultimately want to make sure the board is fully cognizant of. Hopefully they are, I'm sure they are, and for our report does. And it relates to the debt service. And this next agenda item says we always get a report here that shows how comfortable we are with our debt coverage. Very good statistics, and not to worry. However, the second derivative gives me a little concern. We've got debt service of about $105 million today, and it's fixed, so that won't grow. But if we draw down the TIFIA loan, there'll be more debt service on top of it. And it says, well, our sales tax receipts are 287, so on round numbers, we got a 3-to-1 coverage, which is very good. And that revenue number will increase, hopefully, in the future. However, and I can certainly understand why the lenders wanted to encumber the entire sales tax revenue, but the use of that sales tax revenue for debt service relates to only one of the components that the ordinance dictates, and it's the major projects. I think it's 38% of the total. So whereas the lenders have access to 100% of the tax revenues, only 38% of that should be devoted to major projects. And if we were to run into another Great Recession, it is arguably possible that the sales tax revenue will drop and gradually rebound, such that the debt service will exceed the 38% allocation here in the future. And while the lenders have no problem, they'll get repaid. Wonderful. Sandag will be in violation of the ordinance, and I have no idea what the consequence of that is, other than a big scandal in the newspapers, but whether there's any legal problems or anything. So that would be useful to me, and I'm told we keep track of that somewhere in the files of our analytical processes here, to get that surface to what the projections show, the additional debt service costs, the additional sales tax revenues, and this will be a known number. This will be a variable. How bad does this have to get before we have a conflict with the 38% constraint?
Well, if I could just ask a question on that, just for clarity, with regard to the 38%, is the definition of the requirement that it's 38% of gross proceeds, or it's 38% of available proceeds? Because in the context of, debt service, in effect, may come on top of the 38% from a point of view of availability.
It's actually 38% of net proceeds. So you have 3 boxes on top, if you will. You've got one of them is for the ITOC, another one is for administration, and the other one is for the public ed program. So those 3 add up to a little bit over 3% of the gross. Then below that, you've got all of the buckets, and so it's the percentage of the net coming off of those.
Okay, so Dick's point is correct that debt service does not come ahead of the 38% spend requirement.
Right, so as Lisa mentioned in the previous item, when the state collects the revenues, these are transmitted to the trustee first, and the trustee pays bondholders and anybody else that we owe money to. And then net revenues from trustee after debt service, those would come to Sandag.
No, that would be the opposite answer.
Yeah, I was just going to say, that now confused me.
Yeah, so
I don't believe that's the way it works. It's unfair if it works that way, to me.
Yeah,
But
so
bicycle guy.
that's just the mechanics of debt service always has higher priority, is paid first. It's deducted from, so whatever we pay on major corridor projects for debt service, that's deducted out of ultimately the 38%.
Out of the 38%, right.
So when you talk about debt service, you are correct. When these debt service coverage levels take all of Transnet divided, by that to get these 3 times coverage, 2 times coverage, the minimum 2 times coverage. But when we size what we go out for debt, we actually look at those individual pots of funds. So major corridors are 38%. We don't borrow more than that specific pot can sustain.
But that's a variable because you don't know how much or how bad future sales tax revenues might be.
So if we fly really close, right? And we're bonding, so we're using all our debt service and other expenditures and principal interest repayment equal all of that pot of funds in a significant amount of years, then obviously, yeah, we're bringing the margin really tight. And should something like the Great Recession happen, there's definitely risk there. So that is something we look when you see the plan of finance, much of the information that's in there does have those specific coverage levels for that major corridor cost.
Then I'm remiss, because I don't recall ever seeing it and focusing on it, but that's what I want to make sure there is a focus
Right,
on it
and,
as a.
you know, we were talking yesterday, and so, you brought up that question, so just to give you an idea of where we stand this fiscal year, so if the revenues do come in as they've been forecast for this fiscal year, the coverage ratio for this fiscal year would be 1.17 times of the major corridors.
38%
of that bucket. So that means that we're getting 17% more money than what we have that service associated with that 38% bucket.
That's the data I think just needs visibility, because there is an issue there that all hell breaks loose and revenues drop dramatically. Of course, what's the sensitivity to that risk?
Right. Right. What's the risk? Yes.
All right. Anything else? Any other questions? All right. Thank you very much. We will move on to number 12.
Okay, so this is your quarterly financial information through September 30th. And in the interest of time, and that we know that this could take a long time to go through in detail, how would you like me to go through this? Just respond to questions? Or-
Already hit on a couple of these.
You have, which is nice. And Andre's here now too, so.
Stuart would like some discussion, but I might suggest, Stuart, it might be most beneficial if you do it offline with Lisa.
Sure.
Yeah.
It really gets to the understandability
Okay.
of Exhibit 2.
Uh-huh.
And it's very difficult in a spreadsheet like this to get adequate descriptive column headings, but maybe it's an issue of just being real comfortable with the footnotes that expand the descriptions of what these titles will be. I thought, based on my conversation yesterday, I thought I understood column H, and I corrected here today that I didn't. So it's not easy for us. You guys deal with this day in and day out. We plug in once a month and try to remember what we learned last month. That's a challenge, but it might be.
Yeah, we can work on that, absolutely.
Yeah, it might be more time effective.
I need also.
Okay, so everybody's
Yeah,
dropping.
just you.
We went over this last,
Yeah, we
on
already
last
did.
meeting.
Yes, yes.
Year end last.
And the city of Encinitas, they also provided an updated letter for you as, for your request. Although, from attachment 2, there are no jurisdictions that are showing below that 75% threshold.
Yeah, I thought we deserved a current letter.
Yeah, and we did at the.
Even if they just repeat the 3-year-old letter.
Put a new date on it for you.
They put a new date on it. Thank you.
That's okay.
There's a little bit of change in there.
All right, well, recognizing your departure, does anybody have any questions?
Perhaps if we have a light, we're not meeting in December, so.
It's a very light meeting in December.
All right, let's.
Very light.
Let's go with the 6-month review.
The next.
December, the end of December will be, okay.
Yeah, the next time would be coming in February for the December.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay.
This is only 3 months of operation.
Right.
Right.
Okay.
Thank you with it.
All right.
The last agenda item, Andre and Ray, we also did this last month, so
yes.
See if there's anything new and exciting to be added.
Well, maybe something I can just talk about for a couple of minutes that's new and exciting is just this morning we refinanced our SR 125. If you recall, part of it was to pay off the TIFIA loan, part of it is to pay back the commission loan, so it's $62.5 million. So the financing went really well. Just a month ago when we went to the board to get final approval, the present value savings on the deal was about $62 million. As of today, the savings that we ended up with are $88 million. And there was, the underwriters are somewhat astonished. They don't exactly know what's going on, but with the tax reform that's happening, there's been a little bit of a dislocation between the treasuries and MMD, which is our market. And so over the last 2 weeks, we've seen a tremendous rally, especially this last week with tax reform. So just, you know, from 1 month to another month, you don't expect that kind of a savings. So we just hit the day really well. Who knows, it could go down further tomorrow, but in all likelihood, sometimes the market seems to overreact one way or another. So I think, you know, one of the PFM guys who's been doing this said he's done 2,500 transactions. He's never seen something like this, where we put in order prices and we got tremendous amounts. We repriced at an even better price. So I'm just a little excited this morning. We don't do this that often, and to see the way it priced was really amazing. So
that's excellent results. What are you going to do for us next month?
Actually, if you want to see that, one of the things that we are working on that we sent out an RFP.
You didn't like that.
No, but this is the good.
We're supposed to celebrate. Yes, celebrate these moments.
Actually, just since you asked that question, I'll just go to the very end. You know, that the very first piece that just happened today. The other piece that we're working on right now is for new bond anticipation notes. We just sent out an RFP to the banking community. Hopefully by December, January timeframe, we'll go into the market for that. And just a reminder, bond anticipation notes is we issued a TIFIA loan that's kind of sitting on our books. We haven't taken it out yet for $537 million. The idea is that we'll probably use that in 5 years. That's at a 2.7% rate. What we do is issue bond anticipation notes, probably in 3 different tranches over the next 3 years, with the idea that we'll end up taking it out with the TIFIA loan. The reason why we issue bond anticipation notes because the yields, the rates are a lot lower. So kind of take advantage of short-term financing with the idea that we take it out the TIFIA loan, that'll pay it off over a longer period. So that's the next project that we're working on. So hopefully we'll be back in December, January with kind of updates on that.
Hey, can you go back to the 125 debt? If I'm understanding it correctly, is when you guys purchased that from the bankruptcy thing, it was encumbered by some debt.
Yes.
And that's the high price debt you talked about. But am I right in assuming that that debt was strictly collateralized by the revenue off of 125?
Yes.
And when you took over that debt, it didn't change the collateral. You didn't put any additional encumbrance on Sandag at all?
No.
Now that you've refinanced that, what's changed in terms of the collateral? Is it the general credit of Sandag, or is it strictly the revenue off of 125 still?
So it is off the credit of Sandag, but the bond funds, basically the revenues that will cover the bond funds are only from the facility itself. So we'll never be looking to Sandag to make it good if things were to go upside down, if you will.
I'm curious because you said Sandag credit, but you said the source of revenue is just strictly 125 fees.
Well,
those are inconsistent, I think.
Yeah, so SR 125 belongs to Sandag.
Yeah.
Right? SR 125 is not an entity on its own, if you will. It belongs to Sandag. So when the investors are looking, when the rating agencies come out, they're giving Sandag the credit ratings. So we got a credit rating of A and an A minus from Fitch and S&P. But I think what you're getting at is who is responsible for the bonds. It's strictly the toll money. So they would not be looking
The
at
indenture
other
says they
Sandag.
have nothing more than a claim on the toll revenue, period.
Right.
If that falls short, they don't get paid.
Yeah,
Right.
and it's separate from the commission and Transnet.
So it didn't really change anything in terms of the collateral or the exposure to Sandag in general from what the original bonds were that you bought out.
That's correct.
Gotcha. Thank you.
So I guess just going to the beginning of the presentation, so obviously Ray's not here today, so Jim is.
Doesn't look like Ray.
I'm really excited.
But he's still colorful, like Ray.
I take my cues from Ray, of course.
But well, I guess last time we were here was a month ago, and the reason why we're here again is just the way that the quarterly report happens. So on the debt portfolio, not much has changed, but I think on some of the economies, we had
a couple changes, but again, it hasn't been. It's only been a month, so. The Dow Industrials, they continue their kind of eye-popping rally. They're up over 30% from the last year. You see the 10-year Treasury, which is kind of a measure of uncertainty in the markets. It spiked last year about this time for perhaps unknown reasons, but it's since settled in, and people are getting a little more comfortable. The federal funds rate was raised was kept steady in September. Most market watchers expect it to go up at their meeting in December, at least a quarter of a point. The Fed is looking at the inflation rate in the bottom right there, which from September of 2016 to 2017 was 2.33, which is over their 2% target rate. They need to see that over 2% consistently before they'll really start raising rates quickly. Unemployment continues to drop. We're down at 4.2% here in San Diego, which is equal to the U.S. rate and lower than California. We're really getting towards what we economists refer to as full employment. You'd have to go back to 2000 to see unemployment rates lower than this. And before that, you'd have to go back to before 1990 to see unemployment rates lower than this. So we can't expect, I don't think, too much continuing to drop, although your written report will say that the U.S. economy lost some jobs in September with the hurricanes. They just revised those numbers last Friday after we got your written report in. We actually gained a few jobs in September, and we gained over 250,000 jobs nationally in October. So the growth in employment has really continued to be robust. Wages, you can see here in San Diego, grew 6.1%. This is the most recent data we have from the first quarter of this year. Other measures that come out more constantly are for the U.S. as a whole, and they continue to see a little bit of growth in wages, which is important for us as we look to consumer spending.
That's wages per capita. That's not aggregate wages.
That is not aggregate wages. That is your average weekly wage here in San Diego.
Well, 6%. That's huge.
Yeah, that's not a bad jump.
Huge.
Which again, reflected in the fact that we are seeing a slightly larger than expected jump in our taxable retail sales in the last few months. One downer is, of course, the housing prices continue to shoot up 8.1% from a year ago in September. Meaning that only 28% of San Diego households could afford a medium price home were they forced to buy one today. And again, as I said, for FY17, our taxable retail sales were up 3.3%. Year to date, I think Andre did a number yesterday, it was about 3.8%, and we had forecast 2.5% retail sales growth. So things right now are looking pretty good. Longer term consumer behavior, more purchases online, more purchases of non-taxable services could hurt us in the out years, but things are looking fairly robust right now.
Jim, I'm curious if the 28% affordability number is one that is tracked over time, and if it, to the extent that it is, how the 28% compares to
well,
history.
in the depth, that's a very good and interesting question. Luckily, I've looked at that. When we were at the height of the housing bubble in about 2007, that number was 9%. Wow. And the reason isn't necessarily that housing prices were higher then, it's that mortgage rates were much higher then. So this affordability numbers takes into account mortgage rates.
So then would the 28% be closer to a historical norm?
It's still lower than a historical norm, but even in the depths of the recession after the housing bubble and it crashed here in San Diego, we were only seeing about 46 to 50% affordability.
What's
so
the
you
national
would say you're a national average? That I couldn't tell you off the top of my head, but I know here in San Diego, because the national average for a home price is about $280,000. We would think that the national average, because our median household income isn't that much higher than a national average. A national average would probably be in the 50s or 60s. But here in San Diego, we haven't seen anything like that, even at the depths of the housing crash. So while 28% isn't good at all, will probably get worse because we'll probably see some raises in mortgage rates.
So obviously, since you saw this last month, really there have been no changes. I think Caitlin had asked for us to put the cost of capital for each one of the series, which we have done now on the chart. Overall, we're at 378, which is fairly attractive rates, but nothing has changed other than that. I think another comment that you had asked last time is, so this is our debt service coverage ratio. This number did change a little bit. I think it was 268 last quarter. It got up to 273. That's because sales tax, like Jim mentioned, are up 3.8%. So that number has been adjusted slightly higher. And the one thing you'd also asked is if we could potentially just put an overlay of what our debt service will look like when TIFIA comes in. So that's the dotted lines on top of it. And you can see in this particular case, we have a level debt service right now, but with the TIFIA loan, will be an ascending structure starting, if we start the loan in 2026 and we ended 2 years prior to the end of the sales tax.
Andre, based on the conversation we had just a few minutes ago, I think it would be useful in the future when you show us this, to show the debt service as it relates to the 38% pool that incurred the debt, to know what that ratio is, particularly when you see this significant step up with the TIFIA loan. And I know the revenues will step up also, but where's the sensitivity that we talked about before we run into trouble? One question for Jim, back on your charts, I lost it there. The wage increase is staggering, but it's the inflation number here, the 2.33. That is the measure that the Fed uses. There's a wide variety of measures for inflation.
Yes, that's the general consumer price index, and that's
not what the Fed uses.
The Fed.
Janet had her own.
Well, the Fed looks at a number of measures, but this is the consumer price index, and they will, again, it's over their 2% kind of target for the September 2016 to 2017. They'll need to see that over 2% over a period of time before they really start raising.
This is over 12 months.
It is over 12 months. That's your September to September change. So one would expect that they'll see that 2% number consistently, and again start raising rates maybe more aggressively than they have in the last few years.
I'll put you on the spot. What's your personal prediction? Quarter point or half point?
In December?
Yeah.
I think they're still pretty conservative. I think they'll go to a quarter point.
Are we doing a pool?
It could be a half. I mean, I think they're eager to raise rates a little more because they want to prepare for again, we're at kind of a really, when you look at, we're at a real trough for unemployment and some peaks. I think they want to build in some ability to cut rates.
Absolutely, and no one seems to talk about that very much. But boy, the data you show is sure starting to give them some cover to
I think so.
crank it up so they have the capacity to reduce them again.
Yeah.
Okay, anybody have any questions? All right, thank you, gentlemen. The last action item we have here is to confirm that our next meeting will not be on December 18th. As per a year ago, we said we'd have the flexibility to delete that meeting, so we will see everybody on whatever the January meeting is. That we approved early on, 2 hours ago. Okay, anything else that anybody wants to raise? If not, we are adjourned, and thank you all for your attendance.
Nice job.